Welcome, welcome, welcome to another episode of the Lords of Consciousness podcast. I am your host, Clint Culberson, and today I am joined by a very special guest, Mr. Sean Stone, the host of the internet sensation show Buzzsaw, and son of, world-renowned film director Oliver Stone. Sean, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm really, I was talking to you before, but I was just want to tell you how grateful I am that you came on the show and to just kind of share some of the truths that you're finding, because you're one of those guys that's like out there on a very big level, kind of combing the earth for the people that are sharing truths that are, I don't know, less covered and yet have a lot of evidence behind them that are very thought-provoking and tell a bigger picture towards what's happening on this planet and what's happened on this planet and what's going to happen on this planet. And your show is amazing. How long have you been doing the Buzzsaw Show? Is it 2 years now?
Well, we started Buzzsaw in 2013, actually, so 3 years.
Wow.
And I also do I do a show for RT called Watching the Hawks, which has been 1 year.
Excellent. And RT is it Russian television or Russian? What does it stand for?
Well, it stands for Russia Today.
Oh, Russia Today. That's it.
Yes.
And they're a very open-minded news source. I mean, from what I've seen, they seem to be giving, the content creators on their site or on their station to kind of say what they want to say, right?
Yeah, I mean the design of it is basically an alternative news channel for the United States, where you don't have corporate controllers, who are basically there just to line their pocketbooks and to sell you certain things. So we know there's obviously a relationship of General Electric to NBC, for example, and Disney is ABC, and then every one of these companies has like usually major corporations that are in the military-industrial complex, if not the overall like financial corporate complex that rules the country. So when it comes to RT, we don't really have that agenda. We're just they hire mostly a lot of young Americans, but also Larry King is on there and Jesse Ventura, Tom Hartman, and other progressive thinkers, and they give us a platform where we can express our opinions.
That's awesome. That is so cool. It's turning into a site that really, and in a world where you can't trust the media, it's turned into a site that you can trust it, especially being an American, because they sure seem to give us an objective view of our own country, and unlike our own media from this country. So I wanted to ask you what it was like for you to grow up, with a father who was already seeing behind the curtain. Most people have grown up with parents who kind of have been victimized by the brainwashing that's taken place. But what was it like, growing up with a father who was obviously so open-minded?
Sure. Yeah, I guess open-minded is a good way to put it. I mean, basically, we got it was obviously not a traditional childhood. I was able to be on the set of these massive motion pictures and be around a lot of stars and celebrities since a young age. So that, I guess, I came of age understanding that film and filmmaking was a work. It was it's a job. It's not just the entertainment news that you see on TV. I think that really hurts us in understanding the kind of the work and the thought process and the amount of energy and people that go into making a film, to realizing a film, let's say, and the amount of thought process that goes into it, the years of work. So on that front, I think it was enlightening. And then obviously from the historical perspective, my dad loves history. That's why he did this 10-part Untold History of the United States that he released through Showtime a couple of years ago in 2012, and is now on DVD. So I think at heart, you just look at his films, they all deal with history, mostly contemporary history of his lifetime, whether it's Vietnam, the Kennedy assassination, Wall Street, the booming of Wall Street in the 80s, the rise of talk radio, the Doors band. I mean, you name it. It's like everything to deal with everything the post-'60s America as really my dad's canvas. And then when it comes to his take on alternative history, I think you really get a sense of it in The Untold History of the United States. I think that documentary is pretty much the testament of what his thought process is about the takeover of America by the military-industrial complex that basically wants to take us in the direction of the Death Star. I think that's really the danger of what's taken over from this sort of imperial trajectory the United States is going towards. And they started talking about this in the 2000s, around 2001 and whatnot, this militarization of space. So this program ultimately, I think, could lead us in the direction of what Lucas was portraying, maybe 1,000 years in the future with this, the Death Star. But that's kind of what we're seeing at this moment. It's like we're living in it at this point in time, as this fixation on utilizing machinery, technology, drones, robotics, AI, but towards the control of populations, and usually with a destructive recourse if we don't get our way, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of just entered into what I wanted to talk about next, and your show goes into a very deep, goes into some very deep rabbit holes of the esoteric and the control conspiracy. And at the same time, the vast majority of humanity still has no idea about some of the stuff that you're talking about on your show. It's like a bridge too far from where they're at right now sometimes. How would you, in layman's terms, describe to someone who's just coming into open-mindedness of, okay, I'm open to the idea that something else is going on here. How would you describe, in Conspiracy 101, what has taken place and what is currently taking place?
Well, I don't discount people to have at some point encroached upon a lot of these ideas. I think that in the course of your life, you come to places and you have to make a conscious decision. You basically decide, am I going to seek truth for the sake of truth, or am I going to go along to get along? In a crude manner of speaking. Am I going to reach this moment of awakening and say, I want to go back to sleep? I don't know what I just saw in the sky, but I don't want to know either.
Right.
I think there's something, there's some doubt in my mind as to what the government just told me, or, what happened on 9/11 or with Kennedy or whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's just not worth getting into that. And I think most people, at some level, have faced it. And they may not agree with every conspiracy, but at some point they'll come across it and say, wow, there's probably conspiracy here. But they go into that realm of, well, it's probably that one situation, and who am I to really, raise a question or to question or to say anything or to do anything proactively in our country, for example. So that's where you get into this kind of closed-mindedness of people, and it's not really. I don't believe that most people are locked away from this reality. I think that they've all experienced it, they've all encountered it at some point. But it's more a question of conformity than anything else. It's more a question of being afraid to be that person that's standing outside of the crowd. That's if all of a sudden you turn it into a culture that's about open source information, that's about, we're going to destroy the hierarchy of news media that tells us what's going on and what to think, and basically they're getting the script from the CFR and the government and a few hired consultants who are the major guys who give talking points on most network shows, for example, right? So if we take that down and say, I don't trust you any more than my neighbor or somebody who was there who's going to report directly, and we're going to get 10 different sources, reporting directly from any event, you're going to break that hierarchy. And if that was broken, people would feel more comfortable speaking freely. But you have to create the conditions for that. You have to create conditions where people can feel they're safe to speak their mind and to speak their truth and not be judged by it or criticized by it or called crazy for it.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think that's why it helps, it helps to have community start building around the world, of like-minded people. And that way people can feel like, hey, there actually is a safe place to feel this way, to believe this way. You're supported. You're not a crazy person, and the more we start seeing that, I think then the more others will be able to find the courage to cross the line, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
You studied history at Princeton, and I guess I want to ask you why is it so important to understand our past? Because I feel like so many, I'm not sure if it's part of the programming, but so many people have kind of been brainwashed to think it doesn't matter. Who cares? That's stuff that happened a long time ago.
Yeah, exactly, and it very much is a brainwashing thing. A technique, I guess, is that they tell you. Well, they basically bore you first of all with their telling of history. It's rare to find professors or historians who are really exciting as far as their approach to teaching it, especially like in high schools and whatnot, where they can give you like a living picture. And I think that was one thing I have to credit some of my high school teachers. They actually really engaged on the level of description and storytelling, which is what history is. History is just stories. So anyone who likes listening to stories, hearing stories, they should love history. And then the more you actually get into the issue of, well, let's hear those strange, the strange mysteries, history's mysteries or something, right? Let's listen to the stories of the secret societies and whatnot. Then I think it becomes engaging all of a sudden. Then it becomes really interesting. Wow, we don't know the answer. Wow, there is a conspiracy here that hasn't been solved. Take Lincoln's assassination, for example, right? There obviously was a conspiracy. Who ultimately was responsible for it? It's probably more British and perhaps a Jesuit influence than anything. Just being obviously backers of the Southern secession in the first place. But the point is that, like, once you understand that there's a conspiracy and it's mystery, now it engages you as an investigator to want to solve things. But they don't teach. Most schools don't teach that way. Most schools teach you with the sense of, we have answers, we know what happened, we have the answers to science, we understand how the universe works, and we understand how history works. And it's not that. Actually, you don't. So when you engage a student to say, here's a conspiracy, here's a mystery, here's an unsolved question of history, go figure it out for yourself. Now you become Sherlock Holmes. Now you become the detective trying to figure things out. So I think that was what it was for me, was this feeling that when you saw a movie like JFK, it excited you to want to say, I want to go out there and figure it out for myself. I want to seek the truth. I want to become an investigator. So that's the way I approached history, was always having questions that didn't make sense to me, or trying to figure out blanks and gaps or whatnot in my understanding. And that's why that would keep me wanting to learn more. So I think that's really the most important thing, is when you're engaging the young people, kids are endlessly questioning things, right? They're endlessly curious. The system is designed to basically put a stop to that by telling them, this is how it happened, and we know, and it's definitive, so go back to sleep.
Yep, exactly. And, it's like Jesus said, be like the children, And that's another way to be like the children, is to have that never-ending curiosity. And the world, the universe is infinite. So the idea that we'll ever know it all is it's some bullshit programming. I'll say that much.
Yeah.
You had, you were talking about history, and I was, I thought of Jesus and my own past. I'm a former Mormon, and I kind of shed my skins over the last several years. And then the irony is that I'm coming back to some of the wreckage heap of what I shed, and I'm starting to realize this. I kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater on some of it. And one of those would be that I'm finding that there really is some that the holy books, the Bible, even even from the other non-Christian faiths, that there's a lot of really amazing stuff in it. Can you speak to that? That what do the holy books actually hold for us, or what are you finding?
Well, I mean, that's more encryption and coding than anything. The Mormons, for example, they're certainly Masonically oriented, because Joseph Smith was a high-level Mason. I think he was 33rd degree. His encounter with a being, sure, it could have been an alien. Not entirely clear on what it was. The angel Moroni,
right,
that he saw. There was that whole mystery of the tablets, if I'm correct.
Right.
That were given to him, and I don't think we'd know where they are, if I'm correct. But the nature of Mormonism itself, I think, is more of a... if I understand correctly, it was supposed to be designed to sort of be the new religion of Masonry, going forth for the New World. And that's why they headed west to Zion. And if you know Utah, for example, Utah now has become the major hub of the secret space program. That's where they've moved a lot of the Area 51 facility, if not the machinery and whatnot, to these massive underground facilities all across Utah underground.
Right.
So we know there's always been a strong relationship with the Mormons and intelligence, especially the FBI.
Yep.
Also with the Jesuits, both of which are kind of cults within cults, let's say, right? So it's a way of more efficiently, let's say, indoctrinating and controlling people, because, a cult like the Catholic Church is a massive cult, but it's huge. I mean, talking about millions and millions of people, right? About, maybe 1 billion people across the planet, if I'm not correct, or maybe more. So, you can't operate a cult that way. You have to compartmentalize. You have to break it down. So what you do is you create orders, orders of actual operatives to basically have more influence. And the Jesuits are a major operator in that regard, as far as mind control is concerned, as far as, the education system, intelligence operations, very strong relationship with our intelligence services domestically here. So I think the Mormons have a similar role to play, because again, it's a very compartmentalized thing where you have like a small council of elders, right, who pretty much run things, and then everyone else is just sort of obedient to the masters. So, religion is like politics; it's just one form of warfare. There are important scriptures as far as the Old Testament's concerned, as far as, frankly, the New Testament, I think, is very much corrupted. I think there's pieces of real wisdom there, but there's also, too many apocryphal texts that were thrown out by the Catholic Church that are now called, the Nag Hammadi texts, or Codex. That's really important to read. You've got to get away from, just across the board, understanding the Old Testament as the Word of God. You have to read it as a history that was compiled by people in different time periods of exiles, but perhaps as psychological warfare, as actual design for mental control. You get to, for example, for example, take the Old Testament stories about creation, about Noah. Well, that comes from Samaria. That's all in the Sumerian text. So it's not a Jewish story. And it's ridiculous when you have these movies getting made now like Noah, which are clearly derived from a Kabbalistic reading of the Old Testament, rather than from the original Sumerian source that it should be, which is about vying gods, and Leland Onki vying about whether or not they're going to destroy mankind, and others, actually. It wasn't just Leland Onki, but other sky gods, just arguing if they want to wipe out mankind or not. Mm-hmm. They decide let's do it. Let's just wipe them all out. And Onki says, no, I'm going to save the Noah figure in the Sumerian tradition. So you have those stories. You have this issue of Moses probably was a pharaoh, or at least a brother of a pharaoh, and there's much more of a historical relevance to it if they had actually gone to the history as opposed to interpreting the Bible.
Right. And you think that was all, was it manipulated like post-Nicene Creed?
Post what?
Like post-Nicene Creed?
Well, obviously the manipulation of the New Testament began then. The Old Testament, I'm not sure when it was manipulated. To be honest, I think it was always manipulated for thousands of years. It was being manipulated at different points in history. The various scholars are writing down the text, right? They're writing down the story that they want you to they want you to know. So that probably comes from empires of power and certain mystery schools operating therein, who are educated and knowledgeable enough to know how to convey the information.
Right.
Because it's full of coding, right?
Right.
I mean, that's been shown. So, yes, there could be what's called like a divine hand in the religions. I'm not discounting that, but I'm simply saying that even when we talk about divine hands, do we mean extraterrestrial, interdimensional? Is it positive? Is it negative? I'm on the. I see it both ways.
Yeah, exactly. Quite the duality. So, earlier you had talked about the manipulation that's taken place on this planet. You've alluded to some of it, and despite what's going on, we almost see like some World War III type of false flag buildup that's happening, and there's something brewing. It seems like in the world, despite all the negative things that we have, are you optimistic nonetheless for the future?
Well, I try to be optimistic no matter what, whether or not.
Right.
It's justifiably optimistic. I don't know. I really don't know what's coming. There's a lot of talk in the air about financial collapse and the threat of what will occur if the dollar gets devalued and the stock market plummets again. I mean, apparently we're on the brink of it again in the next 2 to 3 years. But I try to be optimistic no matter what, because I do believe that I believe there's a higher power guiding things. I don't trust in man.
Right.
I don't trust in humans to get us through these situations. I believe there's a plan that's greater than us, and is ultimately does work itself out towards the good. And this is mainly a test. So, it's just a question of what do you want to do here? I mean, we all have to ask that question of ourselves, and I don't think most people do. What are you doing on Earth? Why are you here? What brings you into this lifetime? And if you can't answer that, if you can't tune into that, you're wasting your life. So we are at this place where we may have an excess of people. I don't know. I mean, it's not about the world is overpopulated, but it's just people who are not tapping in to their essential nature, to their essential being here. And I think that's really the most dangerous thing, is that the Illuminati, or what's called the Illuminati, but basically, look, the Illuminati was originally the ones who wrote the Bibles and the churches. That's why the all-seeing eyes all over the Catholic churches in the old days, right? Some of them were built hundreds of years ago, right?
Right.
But it's like this sort of I would call it like a hidden hand within human history, right? Whether it comes from interdimensional beings or aliens or whatever they are, right? And again, they're both bad and good. There are some that work for the good of man, but then the devil also apparently works for God, because it's all sort of a challenge to see how humans are going to respond. But at this one level of consciousness, there is a sense that, well, they're going to try to wipe out the population, try to decrease us by 1/2 to 2/3, and that's going to be very devastating if it unfolds. And I think it can unfold if we don't start to mobilize ourselves as human beings and to recognize that we have something to do here, that we're not just slaves, we're not just created as puppets for these beings' pleasure and for their manipulation.
And you can definitely sense that there's a stirring amongst the slaves, like never seen before. I mean, despite how populated we are, this cool internet thing that is enabling you and me to talk right now is somehow connected some of the crazy people so that they realized they weren't crazy, and we were able to start connecting some of the dots, like here's what's going on in the Middle East, here's what's going on in the US, and we started putting pieces together, and over the last 20 something years since the internet's 20 something years, whatever, that it's been around, it's totally changed things, and it does feel like we have the potential now to kind of move it in an exponential rate in terms of people waking up. And I do you think that well, I will ask you this: can you explain to the audience what is a false flag event, and how they've been used over time for those who don't know?
Yeah, a false flag is just a very simple military operation. Basically, in the old days, we referred to the fact of piracy, right? Because you had shipping and all these, that's how your commerce was. To this day, it's still mostly conducted by shipping. But as you're shipping goods, pirates would come along and try to snatch the goods, right? And sometimes the pirates were hired by the state itself. Like Sir Francis Drake was a famous pirate who was working for the British Empire. So he's going around acting as a pirate, but on behalf of the British Crown, and he's seizing Spanish ships and Dutch ships and other merchant ships he can get hold of. So, basically, the idea was if you wave the wrong flag, if you pretend to have a Spanish flag and then you see sees a Dutch ship, the Dutch will think the Spanish did it. But if you're actually a British agent and you're waving the Spanish flag, well, then it's a false flag. You're waving someone else's flag, right? It's misdirection. It's a very basic operation. So when we say false flag with various events that have occurred over the years, like 9/11, for example, we say, well, it's a false flag because it wasn't just an Al-Qaeda operation that destroyed the Twin Towers and hit the Pentagon and all this. So any of these events that are occurring that you have suspicions that, it's not Al-Qaeda per se that's really running the operation, we say it's a false flag. It's another intelligence service or multiple intelligence services working together who are basically putting the Al-Qaeda flag or the ISIS flag or whatever it is on something to make everyone hate that party, which is justifiable. I mean, I don't see any reason to like them, but the point is that you're putting blame on a party that isn't really the one responsible for the event.
Absolutely. And we can see that these type of events have created wars. I mean, maybe the wars themselves are false flags in many cases too. And it's something that it's so important for people to understand that this is a tool that has been used against us. And we can only imagine what's even to come, and I
mean, look, we have in our own history a false flag where, it may have been more of a joke than an intentional false flag, but the Boston Tea Party, when our revolutionaries dressed up as Native Americans and dumped the tea, that's a false flag. You're basically making it look like the Native Americans did it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's been a part of the game ever since the beginning. So,
of course, well, it's the nature of man. I mean, it's all military intelligence. It's all statecraft. You have to attack by means of deception. You don't. If you want to control a situation, you can't. You can't just show people that people see things as they are. There's a great quote from William Casey that came out from Barbara Honegger, I believe, where he said in a private meeting, he said, when we control all the public's news sources, we'll have total disinformation. You see, so that's the point. Was disinformation. The government is constantly setting out to give you 5-6 points of view that are mostly wrong, but ultimately trying to gear you in the direction of hating some group of people or some country to enable an invasion, which has nothing to do with the reason set out for the invasion.
Yeah, and it was never more clear than the Iraqi war. I mean, it seems almost like a general consensus amongst Americans that the whole war was kind of bullshit. And yet we get movies like American Sniper that come out that never question it, that just give you the official line of a guy who enlists and because of 9/11 and goes out there and
he saves the day and kills the bad guy, and yes, he gets PTSD, and they don't really get into his death because his death is also a bit mysterious. Being shot by a veteran, he's trying to help a veteran out of PTSD by taking him to a gun range, and then the guy shoots him. There's probably more to that story than meets the eye.
Yeah.
Especially considering that the guy from Sniper, I can't remember his name right now, had set up this other mercenary group, right? Kroll. It wasn't Kroll. No, it was something else. But anyway, the point was that he was involved in some private military operations after the war, including policing Katrina. So there's some other levels of control on this particular story, and they give us to then see there's always a relationship between CIA and Hollywood. I mean, it goes back. There was some great research done a few years ago by Dave McGowan, who passed away very suddenly from cancer, and he was, it was unfortunate. He was in his 40s. He did this research about Lookout Mountain, where the Air Force used to have a military facility up there in Laurel Canyon, and basically that's where they would shoot movies. They had a whole studio. They'd shoot movies and do all kinds of propaganda stuff. But it shuts down all of a sudden, they say, in '69. But meanwhile, the whole, rock and roll culture, hippie counterculture, pops up very much out of Laurel Canyon, right underneath this military facility, right, or under the eyes of it. So, Dave McGowan's book is really worth reading.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I was unaware.
Weird scenes from the mine or something like. I'm blanking the name, but David McGowan's the author. It's really worth reading that book. But yeah, there's always been a relationship of military. I mean, Hughes, for example, Howard Hughes owned studios here in Hollywood and making movies, and he's also one of the biggest suppliers of the military during World War II, right? Building all their aircraft and whatnot. So, you just think about that relationship that builds up during the Second World War era and thereafter, and then it gets channeled into other things, perhaps mind control operations, right? Controlling music and celebrities through mind control, perhaps. But certainly, on the surface, we know things like, the CIA scripting Zero Dark 30, for example, or the CIA, the relationship of Argo, another CIA story, which are just overt cases.
That's the rabbit hole goes so deep sometimes it blows my mind, and especially when these connections that you're connecting here for everyone, they're so provable, and yet still people, it doesn't turn the light on for them. It's still kind of it must strike up again against that fear of just stepping out and being out there. Maybe they don't want the party to end, because it's benefiting them in some way.
Never discount the power of distraction. They've created this entire, this entire symptom called attention deficit disorder.
Yeah.
Around the idea of being able to be easily distracted, right? So, I mean, I'm not clear on the science of it. If ADD is, really a disorder, and how much it's not being caused in that case by our overall stimulation, by through a mixture of internet, television, electromagnetic frequencies constantly surrounding us and attacking us. Doesn't that, in a sense, create the attention deficiency,
right,
that we're looking at?
Yeah.
Or if not, what is the cause of it? Because sure, there might be more people who are distracted now, but at the same time, they also say, well, look, if you look at the studies, the people that were the most creative were the ones who would have had ADD, who would have been put on these stupid prescription drugs because they needed those disorders, because that's how they created. It's part of the human process, is for us to go into, as artists, to go into depressions, to go into states of, being sort of neurotic. Woody Allen's made a whole career out of his neuroses. So I think that with ADD, it's just dangerous that we're kind of, that they're medicating it, as opposed to finding other ways of helping people become creatively expressing of their their own mindset, basically. Everyone is here with creative gifts. That's part of what being human is.
Right.
Whether it's cooking, whether it's painting, drawing, singing, playing an instrument, even playing a sport. We have some creative skill, and we have to find ways of expressing that.
From a collective level, where do you see the next steps in terms of taking this back? Taking back our own freedom that is our divine given birthright. From a collective level, where do you see the next parts of this whole story going?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good way to end. Is really just to say that we do have this tremendous potential, which is that we're born into a body. And I said earlier, everyone has to ask why they're born here. Where do they come? Why do we come here? Forget where do you come from. That's a bigger question altogether. But why are you here? What are you doing on this earth? You have something to offer in a spiritual sense, in a spiritual capacity, not simply from the level of, I'm going to make X number of dollars, I'm going to have kids and marry someone or whatever it is. Like, that's okay. That's the material sense, sure. We have those paths too. But what is it spiritually that you're doing here? What are you learning? And I think that we're going through a tremendous global test because we are being globalized. We're being put together en masse across all these countries, and we're having to live together now to recognize, yes, we have to respect. I don't think we have to lump everything together so that there's no culture anymore, that everything becomes materialized to the extent that if a corporation sells it to you, it goes across every culture, and all that matters is the profit. There's no morality to it anymore. I do respect the difference of cultures and the difference of languages and the fact that people have different values and mindsets. But we are being put together in a situation where we can start to recognize across all these differences and the beauty of the different colors of the rainbow that there's an ultimate source that creates all of us. So we can start to recognize each other and say, look, we share this affinity for music, for food, for emotion, for certain emotional discussions, for certain politics, right? And that is universal. These are universal themes. Creation, creativity, art, that's a universal concept. So if we can come to recognize that in each other, perhaps the globalization, the New World Order thing can be turned on its head. And we start to realize, you know what? There are much more of us, the humans, the ones who are generally speaking, good people that don't want to be enslaved, that don't want our lives to be dictated to us and controlled. And we far outnumber the few who are trying to control us. But the real issue is the manipulation. And all it takes is that small percentage to manipulate constantly to keep us confused. And that's where we currently are. So hopefully, in this coming time, we can start to recognize the deceptions. And ultimately, I just challenge the ones who are deceiving, the ones who are controlling and manipulating. Be clear as to why. What is your intention? Because if the intention is ultimately good, then explain it, relay that. But if your intention is really just to control, manipulate, and have more power, it won't last. You'll be overthrown. It's just a question of when.
And may that when be soon, my friend. Sean, thank you, man.
I would say that's God's, the source, yes. The creator. That's the creator's responsibility. Ultimately, the when. That's his clock, not ours.
That's true. It's more one of those. If he has a suggestion box, I'm just putting mine in for sooner than later.
There you go.
Sean, I really appreciate you joining us today, and really appreciate you helping us because we're a new website that's really trying to get out there and show the people who are sharing the truths out there that are changing things for the good, for the idea that we really are all one. And so I really appreciate it. Where can people find you and see what you're up to?
Yeah, I think my Facebook page is the easiest. I have a fan page on Facebook, Sean Stone, and Instagram, The Real Sean Stone, Twitter, Watching Sean. Perfect.
And please check out his work on RT and also with Buzzsaw. So thank you, Sean. Thanks a million, man. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. No, my pleasure. Thank you. Thanks.